We are looking at a dark, swirling vortex of wind and shadow. In the epic poem Inferno, Dante designed this exact meteorological violence as the suffocating, inescapable environment of the second circle of hell. The architecture of Dante's underworld is governed by the theological concept of Contrapasso, a divine rule where the punishment physically mirrors the sin. Here, the sin is lust. This classical engraving illustrates the fate of those who succumbed to that sin. Among them is Francesca da Rimini, established by Dante as the archetype of the condemned. Because she allowed herself to be swept away by earthly passion in life, she is literally swept away by an eternal hurricane in death. For 700 years, this stood as a definitive theological warning. But it raises a modern question. What happens if a condemned shade looks into the eye of this divine storm and demands to be put back into the tempest? In his sum, Francesca, Andrew Hozier provides an answer. He approaches the character not as a passive shade, but as a subject whose story requires a modern reevaluation of Dante's original framing. The song reappropriates Francesca's narrative, aiming to replace her historical portrayal as a victim with a specific kind of internal agency. The dark thematic environment of the second circle is established immediately in the track's instrumentation. The musical surface offers no smokescreen. The song opens with a structural irregularity. The rhythmic foundation is built on an unsettled 5/4 time signature. This waveform visualization demonstrates the arithmetic at play. The 5/4 meter directly clashes against the standard 4/4 grid we expect from popular music. This disorientation forces the listener into an unstable audio space, mimicking the physical sensation of descending into the underworld. As the track builds to its climax, the production thickens. Looking at this vintage Moog synthesizer system, we see the exact hardware used to drive the dense layers of analog sound and overlapping choral backing vocals. These specific instruments are engineered to create immense acoustic chaos. They operate as the auditory equivalent of Dante's infernal cyclical winds. The lyrics we are about to analyze operate entirely within this hostile environment. They are mathematically and musically trapped inside the storm. Let's examine the language. This clinical workspace isolates the song's opening couplets for a sequential microscopic dissection. The vocals begin with, "Do you think I'd give up, that this might have shook the love from me?" There is no formal epic invocation. The narrator starts in media res with a direct, familiar address to her lover. Look at the word shook. It functions as a deliberate physical verb. She is reacting in real time to the violent buffeting of the hellish winds. Acknowledging this physical torture serves a distinct rhetorical purpose. It establishes that the external violence of hell does not alter her internal emotional state. The sequence continues. Now that it's done, there's not one thing that I would change. The temporal positioning here is critical. The phrase, "now that it's done," reveals the narrator is speaking from the afterlife, entirely post-execution. She establishes absolute, unalterable finality to her earthly tragedy. The events that doomed her are locked in history. In the original text, Dante's shades weep over their immutable fate. Hozier's subject meets her eternal damnation with total, unrepentant acceptance. The defiance scales up in the next lines. "My life was a storm since I was born. How could I fear any hurricane?" The word storm contains a profound historical allusion. Francesca da Rimini was forced into a political proxy marriage. She was born into a geopolitical trap in Ravenna and bound to a famously cruel husband, Giovanni Malatesta. Her mortal existence was already defined by hostility and lack of control. This illuminated manuscript depicts the figures in robes, anchoring the illicit catalyst of her earthly doom. She and her husband's brother, Paolo, fell in love while reading the romance of Lancelot and Guinevere. The lyrics draw a sharp contrast between her earthly political storm and Dante's infernal hurricane. Here, a minimalist animation weighs those two forces. The jagged complexity of the mortal storm proves heavier than the cyclical infernal hurricane. The rhetorical logic is straightforward. If human life was already a severe tempest, a divine weather event is a secondary concern. Hozier uses Francesca's historical trauma to contextualize her reaction to the hurricane. By her own logic, she has already survived a storm far more impactful than the one she now inhabits. We then reach her ultimate demand. If someone asked me at the end, I'd tell them put me back in it. This block of medieval text proves the existence of Dante's original framing. In 14th century Italian, Francesca tells the poet, "Love seized me." Dante's phrasing is highly calculated. He portrays her as a passive vessel, possessed and controlled by an external force. Hozier's lyric shatters that passivity. She actively demands to be placed back onto the executioner's gurney to repeat the exact sequence of events. The chorus expands on this. "Da, darlin', I would do it again, if I could hold you for a minute." This painting visualizes the endless repetition of condemned souls spinning in the vortex. The lyrical repetition of the word again mimics that cyclical motion. The lyric presents a calculated exchange rate. An eternity of physical torment in hell is weighed against a single earthly minute of human connection, and it is accepted as a sound price. Through this specific transaction, she ceases to be a victim of passion. She emerges as a conscious, strategic negotiator of her own fate. The song delivers its ultimate architectural statement in the outro. "Heaven is not fit to house a love like you and I." This line directly challenges the hierarchy of the Divine Comedy, suggesting that human love can outgrow the heavens built to judge it. She does not claim she and Paolo are unworthy of heaven's perfection. That concedes moral defeat. Watch this stark architectural column fracture under unseen pressure. The actual claim being made is that heaven itself is structurally unfit. It is portrayed here as too sterile and passionless to contain a love of this magnitude. Here, all the analyzed lyrics overlap and blur on screen, mirroring the audio hurricane. By tracking this text, the scale of the achievement becomes clear. We see how Hozier has constructed a formal argument in favor of his subjects. Dante wrote a cautionary tale of moral weakness. Hozier used those same materials to build a story centered on human will. This audio-lyrical architecture stands perfectly on its own. It leaves the listener trapped in the storm, yet entirely emboldened by its defiance. Many listeners approach Hozier's Francesca as a romantic, poetic homage to 14th century literature. This interpretation relies on the specific historical and theological myth of the Inferno, a narrative of doomed lovers trapped in a cycle of eternal, airy punishment. Analyzing the work as a kinetic report requires stripping away this academic dressing. The poetry functions as a container for a cold biological dataset. The lyrics provide a somatic schematic, a literal, sequential mapping of internal structural dependency. This schematic is built on a kinetic equation. It weighs external atmospheric violence directly against innate anatomical vulnerability. In this context, emotional gravity is not a feeling, but a physical law that overrides the biological instinct for self-preservation. The following is a microscopic autopsy of the lyrics, treating the text as a series of kinetic impact reports. We are searching for the exact structural breaking point of the human skeleton when weighted with terminal attachment. The first forensic inquiry tests the mechanical stress limits of the subject through the lyric "shook the love from me." We define shook strictly as kinetic agitation, an external force attempting to dislodge a fixed internal component. Because the subject claims they would not scare so easily, the data indicates that psychological friction fails to induce a mechanical collapse of the structure. The temporal setting of the lyrics is established in the phrase "now that it's done." We define done as the literal execution of the body, which sets the narrative baseline as post-mortem. The anomaly here is the survival of attachment after complete anatomical collapse. The subject compares a past of "life was a storm" against the current terminal hurricane. Clinical tone. Increased external violence is structurally irrelevant to a body manufactured in a highly pressurized environment. Physical pain is the subject's operational baseline. Consequently, the threat of eternal punishment yields zero new behavioral data. The lyric "put me back in it" introduces a state of transactional masochism. The word "it" identifies the exact literal mechanism of destruction: the gurney, the executioner's blade, or the violent vortex. By demanding reinsertion into this destructive mechanism, the subject asserts absolute physical agency. The lyrics "Do it again, if I could hold you" create an unbalanced equation. On one side is the infinity symbol of physiological destruction. The exchange rate is specific, trading eternal structural integrity for exactly 60 seconds of tactile connection. The phrase "ripped away" describes the kinetic tearing of tissue and interlocking parts. The grievance is not moral. It is strictly chronological, defined by the phrase "too soon." The subject assigns a mathematically higher value to the physical mass of another body than to their own eternal survival. The lyrics then utilize semantic inversion, repurposing the vocabulary of disease into pillars of commitment. This semantic inversion is most clearly visible in the lyric, a grip taking hold like a cancer that grows. Love is categorized here as a pathogen. It does not heal the host, it actively consumes it piece by piece. The acknowledgement of the heart would break refers to the mechanical failure of the central organ. This mechanical failure is accepted as collateral damage during the pathogen's consumption of the body. We conclude the biological analysis with the state described as, "When the heart would cease, ours never knew peace." We define peace here as a sterile, useless vacuum, an equilibrium devoid of structural friction. The subject rejects a healthy, frictionless existence because biological survival is worthless without the pathogenic, tactile connection. The final lyrics address heaven, typically viewed as the ultimate systemic and theological ideal. The subject claims, "Heaven is not fit to house a love like you and I." This rejection is a matter of raw architectural incompatibility. The construct lacks the tensile strength to contain the sheer density of the connection, eventually shattering the walls of the bounding box from the inside out. We arrive at the final declaration: "I would not change it each time." This choice to endure infinite destruction represents the ultimate exertion of human agency over systemic pressure. The autopsy proves that human dependency can be engineered to be so absolute that it breaks the physics of its environment. The text provides a successful biological blueprint of an attachment that outperforms the structural limits of both life and the afterlife.